Okay, there's another panellist really who should be up here. He's in the background as well there too. Eamonn McCann, who knows more about this subject, I think, than any of us. Please help me out, Eamonn, if I stray onto the wrong ground.
I didn't know I was supposed to be up there.
No.
He's annoyed about the billing at the end, the same as I am. How did Adams get billing top of him?
I know there's a bias there. That's media bias, as you know. That's what we're here for. Anyway, we're going to start a very, very sort of brief chat, really, and maybe we don't talk too much here. We might open up the floor just to explore, I suppose, some of the experiences of the band, the repercussions of it. I mean, first of all, obviously, I want to ask Roisin about the impetus behind making this sort of film. And I mean, it's obviously a very short piece, but it covers a lot of ground. I mean, was there stuff that you would have, other ground you would have covered if you had been a bit longer, or did you cover everything you wanted to cover?
No, we originally had a much longer piece. We had like something that was about 45 minutes long, and we could have pushed through to make it a feature film, but we felt it was going to lose focus, essentially, and it was better to kind of wind down and have a much tighter, albeit quite speedy and pacey, short film, or a mid-length, as the festivals might bill it. But no, we originally, when I started to do this, I had in mind that I wanted to do something that was going to tie in media bias around Sinn Féin with sort of the treatment of the rise of, like, seriously discussing Irish unification. So that was kind of one of the ideas I had. And then obviously the ban in and of itself is such rich subject matter, and is so separate in many ways. Obviously it's not entirely separate. Excuse my voice, also I'm dying of a cold. But that we just decided to wind back and focus solely on that. Mainly because, I mean, the reason I'd wanted to do this, in the first place, I'd been kind of doing archive work, which had actually brought me to really want to explore kind of counter archives and counter cinema of the 80s, and Derry Film Video Workshop were, very much an inspiration and something I was really interested in. And I was looking at archives, and obviously I came across essentially things like Mother Ireland and how the broadcasting ban had affected the broadcast of something like that, which I'll let Anne speak about. But I then ended up deciding that, I was born like 3 months after the ban, so I don't have a lived experience of the ban. And I just thought between, I'd been living in Ireland, I'd been living in Dublin, where Sinn Féin had become very popular. This is like 2017 when I left. Had become very popular with kind of a younger electorate. And there was a lot of kind of patronising sort of commentary from Irish media and sort of legacy media and big journalists, sort of Pat Leahy characters, I guess, about sort of younger people not having a lived experience or an understanding of the conflict in the north, and that's why they were willing to vote Sinn Féin and interested in Sinn Féin, which ignored the fact that actually they probably spoke to the main things that interested young voters, sort of like housing crisis. And then I was in Britain, then I moved to London, and Brexit happened, and the North was obviously the sticking point in all of the negotiations, and it became so apparent that there was this like huge kind of lacuna in people's understanding and like the general public imaginary where the North should be, and they just didn't understand it. And I thought the ban was a really perfect vehicle with which to explore both of these things, basically how the British public don't understand the North and why that might be, because there is a reason that there is. It's not happenstance. It's intentional, the ignorance there is about the North in Britain, and why there is such kind of moral panic around Sinn Féin in the South.
Thanks. And Stephen, you got involved in the controversy because of this Dispatches documentary that Mary Holland approached you with. I think it was in April 1990. And it was because of a 16-minute interview, I suppose, which I suppose was quite unprecedented. A 16-minute interview with Gerry Adams.
Yeah.
And you inhabited Adams so accurately that you were in the hot water.
I thought I did say this maybe when we were, the point is, Mary Holland, who's one of the most, respected and a wonderful journalist, came to me and said, I've done an interview with Gerry Adams, and I don't think anybody had done this miming thing before. Before Mary had it, no. Because she said she thought the thing to do now is that everybody should hear what he's saying, because it could change things, because a different message was coming from Sinn Féin. And so it was Mary, so I could do it, you know. And I made no attempt to imitate him. I only meant to offer as much clarity in what he was saying.
Kind of improved on.
Well, no, I just thought the thing to do was, if that was the intention, the right thing to do was to speak with absolute clarity, so that everybody knew whatever the subtleties that were being expressed, they could understand it, you know. And that's it. And actually, by the way, I never thought about, some of the lads were thinking about the money they were making and partying and all that.
I was going to ask about that.
I honestly, I can't even remember if I got paid or not. And I stopped doing it. I maybe did Martin McGuinness as well, but then, and then I just stopped doing it. The money was not the object. The money was what Mary had said to me. Yeah.
I mean, the money obviously is the object for some of the people you were talking about there, because obviously they're struggling actors, you know, I mean, they don't get to be leads in feature films,
Yeah.
like someone.
No, I mean, there's a clear difference between, Stephen was a rising star then, and that was why it caused controversy, and that was the difference between them. For the others, yeah, they were jobbing actors, and this was like a lifeline to them, and they had this, they described it, this flying squad of actors who were going in and out. But part of the controversy with Stephen was exactly this, that he actually had a profile beyond Ireland, essentially, and that's why it was also controversial.
Yeah, so
Sorry, Stephen, I'm embarrassing you now, but it's true.
Yeah, so we had been more of an unknown actor, something that wouldn't have maybe
Yeah.
blown up as.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I just want to say, because I respected Mary so much, maybe if anybody else had asked me, I wouldn't have done it, but I did it for her.
Yeah.
So Anne, I wanted to ask you really about, I suppose, in the sense of timing of all this, the band coming in, you were working for several years here in Derry, in the city, because I know, you know, obviously, from some of the other members of the crew were very close friends of mine, whatever, so it was very exciting. We were all waiting to see this, the first broadcast production from Derry Film Video, who'd been in the city for about 5 or 6 years at this point. And obviously it had to be a work from Derry that was shot down in flames at the beginning, but there had already been issues by Channel 4. Can you talk a wee bit about that
Well,
before the ban?
if you were an independent filmmaker in the north in the 80s and you wanted to explore certain subjects, you were already a target of intensive scrutiny even before these restrictions came in. And I just want to say Jim Curran, who worked on the documentary as well from Derry Film Video, is here tonight. And he recently moaned to me about all the hours of vlogging he had to do for Mother Ireland. But there was already intense scrutiny, and the head of Channel 4, Jeremy Isaacs, came over to Derry to meet all the members of the film group. I wasn't there that day, but that's that was unheard of. And Mother Ireland was made entirely within the broadcasting restrictions of the time. I had to check with Channel 4, I had to check the Independent Broadcasting Authority in the North had cleared it. And really I think you have to look at the political context of the time. 2 issues. One, the electoral success of Sinn Féin, and the threat that Margaret Thatcher saw from the media. There were several programmes. There was already the BBC's programme, Real Lives at the Edge of the Union, which focused on Martin McGuinness and Gregory Campbell. And there was ructions over that because Martin McGuinness came across as too nice. But as I say, we finished Mother Ireland in March '88. I did the online edit in London, and one of the women we had interviewed, Rea Derry, was then killed exactly at that time in Gibraltar. on an IRA mission, and I actually had to get permission to interview her as a recently released prisoner, and as far as we were concerned, her military activities were in the past. But once we told Channel 4 that our Mairead Farrell was at Mairead Farrell, they were panicking because on the one hand they thought, God, this is the only footage of her, this is a great coup, and on the other hand they were petrified of Thatcher, and there was also fears that Channel 4 would be privatised, so that was the climate. So until October the 19th, 1988, as I always say to people, at lunchtime everything in Mother Ireland could be broadcast. At tea time, half the programme was gone and could not be broadcast. And the restrictions covered listed organisations like the IRA, which was an illegal organisation, but it also covered perfectly legal organisations like Sinn Féin, like the Veteran Women's Organisation, Cumann Man, in their very strictest interpretation by their lawyers. He said the Christy Moore song had to go, archive footage of Moll Gone from the 1930s had to go. So they could have broadcasted any time in the months up till then, but there was no reason until the restrictions came in. So, but what it meant that it was broadcast, and I had a grand old time travelling and touring America with it, with a discussion on censorship. But personally, I believe what it came down to was Mairead Farrell came across as the girl next door. What makes the girl next door go on a bombing mission? She's intelligent, she's attractive, she can articulate herself, but how can you have a terrorist like that? So for me, that's why Mother Ireland couldn't be broadcast. And it was eventually broadcast a few years later in Channel 4's band season. And I had to sit in the basement of Channel 4 with an editor and their director of programmes, Liz Forgan, with an actress. And I'd say we did 6 different versions of Mother Ireland before I left, with the 2 Sinn Féin women dubbed one version, with the 2 Sinn Féin women and Brenda McAliskey dubbed, with the 2 Sinn Féin women, Brenda McAliskey, and the archive footage dubbed. And I was just mad, and the actual version that went out was everyone in their own voices, except for part of Mairead Farrell. When she was talking about cultural issues and the Mother Ireland image, that was in her own voice. But when she was talking about growing up in Belfast, getting involved and being in prison, that was in an actress's voice. Your programme really showed the absurdity of it all very well. And then when it was broadcast, people said, what was all the fuss about? We see stronger stuff on the news every day. But I think it was, to me, it was Mairead Farrell and the fear. I mean, she was I think a history and politics student at Queen's when she was killed. And she had great leadership potential. I thought it was an awful tragedy. But they couldn't have someone like that speaking.
They did ask you to check out the montage on there of IRA women and stuff, was there?
Oh yes, when it was broadcast, there were certain things they wanted cut out. The Christy Moore song went, didn't have that. Footage of IRA women that I had bought from Channel 4, that I had seen in Channel 4 and bought, they wouldn't let it be broadcast in its context. So I had to go. Some photographs went, a dissolve between Pat Murphy's Philomane Devlin, 2 masked women. That dissolve had to go because they said that signified a connection between past and present. That's how detailed they examined it.
What year was this? Because it's 2004 that they did that censored or banned thing, isn't it?
No, this was about
1983, wasn't
was
it?
it 92 or 93.
Okay, because they did another in 2004, which was banned materials. Yeah, yeah. And when they've changed it, when it came back
And there
in.
was some very powerful footage of Emmett Rose after she'd been shot with a plastic bullet. They said that it was too emotional for British television. But about 2 years later, Ken Loach broadcast it in, I think he did on Troopside.
Mm.
So it was really
BBC,
what
sure.
context on BBC, what
Yeah.
context it was in, you know, and we felt very strongly, well, we're telling parts of our history that interest us, that aren't sensational,
Mm.
the parts of culture that we're interested in as feminists,
Yeah.
you know, and like you showed two funerals at the start, one in Derry and Mairead Farrell's funeral in
Yeah.
Belfast. I was both of them funerals and they were both terrifying.
Mm.
Like it wasn't a good time
Mm.
really to be working as well, you know.
Yeah.
You got an awful lot of and once the programme wasn't allowed to be broadcast, you were tainted. You were sort of unknown, you know, so to try and get a job in the media, you were an unknown, you know, until then. So it was very difficult. And at the end, the effect of the censorship on me was self-censorship. Because
This
I
was the-
decided I've had enough, I'm out of this, and I went into education
Mm.
for many
That's-
years.
I mean, that's really distressing. And I know that I've read interviews that you've given, and I know that the
Yeah.
broadcasting man is what led to you kind of deciding to take a break from filmmaking,
Yeah.
which is really terrible. I guess
Well, if
it's-
you're by yourself, and I had left the workshop, it is scary, you know. If you're in that support network, at least you're in the support network. Because I remember one time in Derry, and I wasn't in Sinn Féin, or I wasn't used to being harassed, you see. And I remember walking over to the Guildhall, and I saw police there, and I just saw one guy looking at me, and I said, he's going to stop me. And he did. And he said, are you still making films, Miss Critty? And I was freaked out. And then some of my friends said to me, don't be stupid. And anyone who reads the Derry Journal knows that you're trotting off to film festivals. But if you weren't used to it, there was that sort of low-level intimidation.
See, it was
But
mentioned in
really-
the House of Commons and all, you know, so I was stopped in the street with somebody who thought, because I knew you would talk in trouble, because it was in the, this was
Yeah.
mentioned in the House of Commons, so
Yeah.
there is a lot of scared people. Sometimes that would obviously, you know, take something like this and the notoriety that you're getting, and obviously fear the worst.
Yeah, but I must say, one of the big campaigners against the broadcasting restrictions in the South, Section 31, which sometimes we forget about, one of the main campaigners was Michael D. Higgins against it. He was one of the leaders against the censorship.
I wanted to give somebody, because we haven't got an awful lot of time, but I wanted to give somebody a chance to ask a question or make a comment, or Eamonn, have you anything you'd like to throw into the mix from what you just saw with the film?
Well, what I just heard from the table there, it struck me just now. Sorry, I don't think I needed to stand up, but there you are. I'm up now, so I'm not going to. One of the interesting things about Section 31 in the South, which is largely the same effect and the same intention as the broadcasting ban over here, is that the reaction of journalists in the South was different to the reaction in the North. As strange as it might seem to some people, the reaction was far more militant sort of up here than it was in the South. Now you would think that sort of the relative openness and the relative freedom of speech sort of in the South that they would have been. Sort of the people, you know, really hitting the mark sort of in campaigning against a Section 31. And many of them were. Like one of the leaders of the campaign against censorship on RTE is sitting beside me, Grenady Horgan, sort of fought very hard, sort of. And the reason why they had to fight very hard, people like Grenady did, and Eileen Golan, who led the two of them led that campaign, was that of course there's a lot of people in Dublin. You know, in the North, I didn't meet one single journalist, not one, who supported a broadcasting ban on Sinn Féin and the other organisations. And that included, for example, Stephen Rea from Derry, who was the editor of the London Daily Sentinel, and also a leading member of the Official Unionist Party. And he had noted he was 100% against it, so we can't have this, whatever sort of government it is. I can remember the editor of the Belfast newsletter, whose name I forget now, but a number of people, the newsletter Chapel of the NUJ, absolutely solid, not a single dissenter. Now, I find that interesting, and I never found any, I was in the NUJ at the time, I never found anybody who said in the South, oh, I support this, we must keep these terrorists out, not at all. Sort of, you had a combination in Dublin of right-wing a crusader, like Desiree O'Malley, whatever he was, I forget the name of his party. Desiree O'Malley and a few other people sort of on the right, and John A. Murphy, who's a professor at UCC. It was campaigning vigorously, day after day after day, in the newspapers, saying we support Section 31, keep these terrorists off our television screens. And they were backed up. Here's the peculiar thing about the South, which could never happen. They were backed up in Dublin by people who defined themselves as socialists. They might have named some of them. Owen Harris, was one of the Southern Harris when he was the leader of them. And a few other people are justly, sort of rightfully forgotten now. What was called at the time the Workers' Party. Now, the Stickies. They were actually in favour of the Section 31 and said so openly. You didn't have that phenomenon in the North, sort of on any side. And I always find that very, very interesting. Sort of, I could spend an hour sort of trying to tease out the lessons from that. But we should keep it in mind, that the journalists, unionists, nationalists, Green, Orange, and otherwise in the North were solid. That wasn't true of journalists in the South.
Yeah, so it was just initially you say that about RTE. There was a documentary that RTE made in Derry about 1965, 66 by Rourke, and it's about Rea Derry. And it featured people like Brian Field's father, Paddy Field, he was a teacher, my grandfather, Frank Macaulay, Eddie McAteer, and they talked about the gerrymandering in Derry and explaining how it all worked and explaining the discrimination in the council and so on. But RTE banned it themselves, and they said it was too sensitive to be shown because they knew it was here we were about to explode, and they wouldn't show it until years and years later. But you can Google it on YouTube. It's a really interesting documentary at the time.
Any other thoughts?
Just want to say the actress who dubbed all the versions of Mother Ireland, can't remember her name is Helen, but people of a certain age in the North might remember Romper Room. And she was the woman, she looked into it, looked like a table tennis bat, and she said, and I can see Tracy, and I can see Heather. She couldn't see Manny Noshins or Sineads. She was a lovely woman. She was the actress who dubbed for Mairead Farrell and all the other women.
Miss Helen, remember that?
You could make a sequel, of even more comic things, like the bit about whether they, ban Star Trek.
Yeah.
Because they talked about, Ireland being united and the army having to leave and stuff. And somebody said that the reason why that episode was written was because there'd been a previous one about drunken people with Irish accents. There'd been so many Irish Americans complaining, so they had to get a Star Trek episode. But I remember watching that. I was just catching it one day in the 80s or early 90s or whatever. And, obviously, that there's going to be an edit, of course.
Do people know what we're referring to? It's this episode in Star Trek where they talk about Irish unification. Okay, yeah. Happening in 2024.
So you could go full-blown comedy. I mean, obviously there's lots of comedy already in that, but you could just go.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of places we could go. Like Section 31, as Eamonn was saying, is so much more interesting in some ways if you want, but it's not. Yeah, you don't have quite the comedy kicks that you get from doing sort of Thatcher's broadcast ban. You didn't have the dubbing and stuff, which makes the banning cinematic if you want. Like, right, that's watchable. Section 31, I think, is a little bit less watchable. Perhaps also there's less footage because it was so extreme and so total, right? Like people were not shown, essentially. They were completely not there. But it is indicative of, I guess, that kind of distancing that the South wanted to do, and the way it's kind of retained this kind of disinterest in the North until I feel recently, and that's something that always kind of characterized its politics, and it's characterized its treatment of Sinn Féin in the South as well, in some ways, I think, no? But yeah, Section 31 certainly is really interesting. But again, dealing with art, like, a lot of this was also about archive and who would give us access and how that would work. And we were very lucky that Northern Ireland Screen Digital Film Archive, I'd won some funding and I went back in to them, and I basically was like, to the archive, I was like, do you have money to commission? And they were like, we do. I was like, would you commission me? I want to do something about Thatcher's broadcast ban. And then you know, they were basically really supportive and gave us all access, and they even digitized stuff for us, which was incredible. But I mean, a lot of things that are archive films like this, that you can also be entirely independent, where like no one stopped us and restricted us from showing anything, or saying anything. Doing that and not having it be like a broadcaster that's a BBC commission, so you have access to BBC archives, that's kind of quite lucky and quite unique in a sense, because you get freedom and
Or
archive.
there is some characters you never want to see again, like Kilroy Silk, you know. Yeah, somebody here's the last of them.
Marty, I just wanted to kind of very modestly say, Roisin, I don't know if you realise, but it was the nerve centre that were behind putting that whole digital archive together, and Marty specifically, so just wanted to say, acknowledge that.
Very humble, very humble.
To wrap up now, anyway, unless somebody else has got a last comment that doesn't involve praising the nerve centre, I'm going to wrap up and the next event go on.
I'm just gonna make a final comment, like, that I guess was one of the things I wanted to bring up. Like, this film has been touring, and obviously people who don't know anything about Irish politics and don't know anything about the North have been very interested in it, and I think it is because, I mean, it was made, you know, it was made in the last year, and what's been going on in Gaza, and very much about what's been happening across Europe in terms of like media state censorship and forms of kind of you know, control over speech, privileging certain narratives that I think we haven't probably seen in a long time, and I think that's why the film has ended up actually speaking to audiences that maybe, you know, wouldn't maybe have taken an interest or understood this in the same way, and I think this speaks to this moment particularly. Which is why, like, we brought it to a Dutch audience and they loved it and had lots of questions to it. So that's the only thing.
Well, that's great. I mean, I think it's about trying to get the sinister side of this across rather than just the comedy, because I think the comedy obviously is the thing that can leap out at you, the farcical nature of it, but actually it's very sinister.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for coming.